2 weeks later. At Tianan Pagoda. Thud. 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 The innkeeper was also present, his face drenched in sweat, and he said, "Secure that door with reinforced wood and make sure it's tightly shut. I noticed earlier that it's still a bit open." The abbot of Tianan Pagoda, holding a kettle, poured a cup of water and handed it to the innkeeper, saying, "Take a sip of water to clear your mind. You've worked hard since this morning." The innkeeper respectfully received the cup with both hands and said, "Thank you, venerable monk. It's not much trouble. I'm just overseeing and making sure they do the work carefully." The abbot replied, "Amitabha Buddha, this contribution of yours is deeply appreciated by the pagoda. With winter approaching, the children no longer have to worry about rain and wind seeping into their sleeping quarters. Thank you so much." The innkeeper sat down, took a sip of water, and quickly waved his hand. "Oh no, I just contributed my labor." The cost of repairing the pagoda was entirely covered by Master Luong. Speaking of Master Luong, he seemed to foresee everything like a sage. When he mentioned the payment after the trip, I didn't understand what he meant. But when I arrived at the address Master Luong had written, it turned out to be the house of the Dome family, a well-known wealthy family. Venerable monk, when I mentioned the name Dome Thai Ton Trang, everyone in the Dome family was startled. They thought I was making up stories to extort money for offerings and exorcisms. After following Master Luong's instructions, I opened the cabinet and looked inside, finding a small, albeit faint, inscription. The abbot gently asked, "What did the inscription say?" The innkeeper replied, "Inside the corner of the cabinet, there was a small, slightly faded inscription, Young Lady of the Dome family, Dome Thai Ton Trang." It turns out that the wood used to make that cabinet was from the coffin of the young lady of the Dome family. The characters inside the cabinet were carved by the Dome family when they ordered the coffin. As soon as the Dome family members saw the inscription, they immediately invited me into their house. After I recounted what had happened, the elderly and young alike burst into tears. They said that 4 years ago, shortly after the young lady's grave was buried, grave robbers had excavated and plundered it, taking even the coffin because they knew the wood was valuable and expensive. The next day, the family found only the bare body lying in the hole. Everyone was heartbroken and devastated. The abbot closed his eyes, clasped his hands, and sighed. Amitabha Buddha, how could there be people so heartless, losing their humanity to such an extent? They didn't even spare the dead. Just hearing this story makes me feel a pang in my heart. But it's fortunate that you didn't mind the long journey and took the effort to return the spirit of the deceased to their family. The innkeeper, feeling embarrassed by the abbot's praise, responded, "You flatter me, venerable monk. I was merely following Master Luong's instructions. However, I don't understand why that evening, Master Luong gave me a choice. One was to burn the cabinet to ashes and scatter them in 4 directions, which would prevent the ghost from harming anyone in the future. The other option was to accept the task of resolving the deceased's grievances." The head monk smiled. Master Luong, after saving the elderly woman and the child, has completed his task. He cannot guide the soul of that woman back to her family. Only you can do this, but considering what her soul has done to your family, it can be considered a grievous sin. If you had burned the cabinet, you couldn't be blamed. Yet, you chose a more difficult path, which is the most compassionate. Master Luong's intentions were quite clear. Your choice to guide her soul back home is your merit. Your merit is not only measured by the money the Dome family will reward but also by the virtue it brings to future generations. Furthermore, you used the entire reward to help the temple with repairs and to ensure a peaceful life for the children here. Master Long used your own blessings to create merit for you and the temple. Master Long is truly kind-hearted and wise. Amitabha Buddha. Hearing the head monk's words, the innkeeper felt enlightened. Indeed, if he had chosen to destroy the ghost back then, he wouldn't have gained the merit he has now. Greed for immediate benefit would have cost him precious things later. Clasping his hands and bowing, the innkeeper softly said, Amitabha Buddha, thank you, Master, for helping me understand everything. The head monk smiled. It's all due to your compassion that this happened. I should be the one thanking you. The innkeeper pondered for a moment and then asked, But why does Master Long wander around so much? With his abilities and heart, he could live a prosperous life. The head monk's face turned slightly sad, and he said, Everyone is born with different destinies. You're right, Master Long is virtuous, but deep inside, I sense there's still a shadow over his heart. Some are born wealthy and healthy, while others suffer from poverty and illness, but everyone must strive to live on. There are also those burdened by karmic debt, maybe from a past life or this life. They are said to be cursed by the heavens. I don't know what sin Master Long has committed to still be paying for it after 50, but I hope his accumulated merit will soon help him find peace and relieve his burden. Amitabha Buddha. Silently looking up at the vast blue sky, both the innkeeper and the head monk prayed for Master Long's safe journey and the creation of more merits to help others. R-A-O, R-A-O, R-A-O. The rain was still pouring heavily. For the past 2 weeks, Master Long had been heading south on his journey. Since leaving the innkeeper's home, he estimated he had traveled about 50 miles. It started raining when he reached this place, and the further he went, the heavier the rain became. Boom, boom, boom. Thunder roared, shaking the earth. Knowing it was impossible to continue in such weather, he looked around but only saw rice fields and open fields with no houses in sight. Plop, plop, plop. The rain grew heavier. Struggling through the muddy path, hoping to find shelter, Master Long finally spotted a leaf hut under a banyan tree. Braving the wind and rain, he ran inside just as a thunderclap shook the earth. Bang! It felt like the ground beneath him shook. The thunder and torrential rain seemed like ominous signs. Suddenly, a voice from inside the hut startled him. A woman in her 40s, the hut's owner, spoke. Come in, sir, to get out of the rain. This is the heaviest rain we've had all year. It's going to flood everything. It's scary to have such heavy rain in the middle of autumn. Master Long greeted her and replied. Hello, the rain is too heavy. May I take shelter here for a bit? I'll leave once it stops. The hut owner smiled, revealing her blackened teeth from betel nut chewing, and continued. Sit down, sir. The rain came suddenly and heavily, so I couldn't pack up and leave either. My son at home must have seen the heavy rain and stayed indoors. The thunder is frightening. You're shivering from the cold. Sit down, and I'll pour you a hot cup of tea to warm you up. Sipping the hot tea, feeling less cold, Master Long asked. May I ask where I am? The hut owner replied. I knew you weren't from here. Where are you heading that you don't know? This is Van Tai Village, Tam Hung Commune, Tui Nguyen. Where are you from, and why are you here? Master Long nodded and replied. I'm originally from China but have lived in Vietnam for over 30 years. I'm on my way to Ton Hoa. Why is your village so deserted? I walked a long way without seeing any houses. The hut owner laughed and said, "My village is large with lots of land. The place you walked through was rice fields, so there's no one there. You have to go further in from the banyan tree to see more people. My house is there too. This is just a hut for people working in the fields to rest. Are you really walking to Tonhoa? And you don't look or sound like a Chinese person." Master Long took another sip of tea and replied, "I'm walking, but I got caught in the rain. And from the looks of it, it'll rain for at least 5 more days before it stops. So, if you have fields, make sure to drain them when the rain eases. It won't stop anytime soon." The hut owner was surprised. "Wow, you speak like a fortune teller. Is it really going to rain for 5 days?" Master Long nodded. "I'm just a grave digger, but if you trust me, do as I say. Don't be fooled by clear skies and think the rain has stopped." As soon as he finished speaking, the rain outside had eased. He stood up, paid for the tea, and asked, "Is there any lodging in the village?" The hut owner replied, "There's no lodging here. It's all villagers, and not many outsiders come by. You'll have to go into the village and ask around for a place to stay. Or you can go to the village head's house and see if he can help you. To get there, go straight down this road, turn right at the village well, and you'll see a dirt path lined with bamboo. Ask someone there, and they'll guide you to the village head's house." "But didn't you say you were going to Tonhoa?" Master Long replied, "I suddenly feel like staying here for a few days, and all my belongings are wet. I need to find a place to rest. Thank you, I'll be on my way." Leaving the leaf hut under the banyan tree, Master Long walked along the dirt road towards Van Tai village. As he stepped out, he looked up at the sky, still filled with dark clouds and occasional thunder. He raised his hand to his nose and sniffed, frowning. "Why does the rain smell fishy? Is something about to happen in this village?" The rain had stopped, but the atmosphere remained gloomy and overcast. According to the owner of the small tea shop, Mr. Long went straight and found a large well surrounded by red bricks, with moss-covered well walls exuding an ancient, time-worn look. A short distance away was a LCVNG tree with a gnarled trunk and lush green foliage. To the right of the well was a dirt road flanked by rows of bamboo stretching into the distance. Mr. Long softly said, "This village is truly peaceful, with clear water in the well and a thriving LCVNG tree. There is no miasma here, so why does the rainwater smell fishy? It's quite perplexing." Following the tea vendor's directions, Mr. Long was about to step onto the dirt road. It was deserted as the rain had just stopped and there was no one around to ask for directions. Suddenly, he heard a raspy cough behind him. Turning around, he saw an old man in white clothes drawing water from the well. Just a moment ago, there was no one there, but now an elderly man had appeared. It was certainly strange, but before Mr. Long could say anything, the old man pointed towards the dirt road and said, "Just keep going straight, enter the house with the tamarind tree at the gate." Mr. Long instinctively looked in the direction the old man pointed, but when he turned back towards the well, the old man had disappeared. However, the water bucket that had been lying on the red brick floor was now on the well's edge, filled with water spilling over the sides. In the empty stretch of road, Mr. Long bowed his head slightly and said, "Thank you for the directions." After walking about 300 meters and passing a few houses, Mr. Long suddenly stopped in front of a bamboo gate. Inside the gate, slightly to the right, was a large tamarind tree. From outside, he could see that the house within was a spacious thatched cottage with a garden and a small pond directly in front. Mr. Long called out, "Is anyone home?" The house had a dog, and hearing the noise, a dark yellow dog ran out the entrance barking loudly. Woof! 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 Hearing the dogs barking, a male voice called out from inside the house. "Who's out there?" Mr. Long stood outside the gate waiting. A man of about 50 stepped into the yard. Seeing someone outside, he shouted at the dog, "Vang, stop! Go inside!" Hearing its master's voice, the fiercely barking dog immediately fell silent. As the man approached the gate, the dog tucked its tail and went back into the yard, lying down under the eaves of the house. The man looked at Mr. Long curiously, probably recognizing that he wasn't from the village. He asked, "Hello, who are you looking for?" The man addressed him respectfully because Mr. Long appeared quite elderly. Mr. Long bowed and replied, "Hello, may I ask if you are the village head?" Opening the gate, the man answered, "Yes, I am the village head. You don't seem to be from around here. How can I help you?" Standing closer, Mr. Long noticed that the village head had a square face. Despite his dark, mottled skin, his eyes were bright and conveyed a sense of kindness. Mr. Long respectfully continued, "Hello, village head. You recognize that I'm not from the village right away, which shows how well you know your people. I'm just passing through and got caught in a heavy rain. I was looking for a place to rest and dry my clothes but couldn't find one. The tea vendor under the banyan tree at the village entrance directed me here for help." Upon hearing that, the village chief cheerfully swung open the bamboo gate and said, "I see. Please come inside, you're soaking wet. Hurry, come inside quickly." Though warmly welcomed by the village chief, despite being a stranger, Mr. Long felt something was amiss. The scenery and people of this village seemed very nice. Though he hadn't interacted with many villagers yet, from the old lady at the water stall to the village chief, they all appeared to be honest and kind-hearted people. Not to mention, there was a strange omen at the village well. Since entering the village, everything had been very peaceful. The old man who had given him directions earlier certainly wasn't an ordinary person. With the ancient well and the lush mastic tree, the old man in white who showed him the way seemed almost like a village guardian deity. This indicated that this land was very sacred and protected by a deity, but why did Mr. Long smell a fishy scent in the rainwater? Seeing Mr. Long's clothes were drenched, the village chief thoughtfully brought out some of his own clothes for Mr. Long to change into and said, "Please change out of your wet clothes and put these on. We're about the same size, so they should fit." Mr. Long accepted the clothes with a smile. "Thank you, village chief. You're very considerate." After changing, Mr. Long came out to find the village chief had already prepared tea and was waiting at the table. Inviting Mr. Long to sit, the village chief poured tea into cups and softly said, "Please have some tea. By the way, I still don't know your name." Mr. Long replied, "My name is Long. To be honest, I am a grave digger. I was on my way to work when it started raining. There was no place to take shelter along the road, so I got completely soaked. I asked the old lady at the water stall under the banyan tree if there was any lodging around here where I could stay for a few days before continuing my journey, but she said there wasn't. She directed me here, so I took the liberty of coming to ask for help. I'm sorry for troubling you, village chief." The village chief waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, don't say that. It's no trouble at all. I live here alone. Whenever there's a village festival, the commune officials also stay at my house. That's why Mrs. Mean at the water stall directed you here. As you probably noticed on your way here, this village is still very poor, with mostly thatched houses and earthen walls, so there's no inn. If you don't mind, you can stay here until you're ready to leave. Mr. Long asked. Where is your family? The village chief replied. My wife passed away a decade ago, and my son has been away for work for 3 years now. Young people nowadays don't want to stay tied to the fields, so they all leave. But what can you do? We have to support the younger generation in their endeavors. So, it's just me, this old man, at home. Ha ha ha. Then, looking at Mr. Long, the village chief quickly added. Oh dear, I'm sorry for complaining about my old age in front of you. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Luong, I'm 52 years old, and I've been the village chief for over 10 years now. After the war ended and I was discharged from the army, the villagers elected me as the village chief, and I've been in this position ever since. Mr. Long smiled. So, you're actually a year older than me, Mr. Luong. But you still look very fit and healthy. Mr. Luong widened his eyes in surprise because, based on Mr. Long's appearance, he thought Mr. Long must be at least 55 or 60 years old. Mr. Luong said. You must be joking, how can that be? Mr. Long laughed. I'm not lying, village chief. Though my hair and beard are grey, I'm actually a year younger than you. Maybe because my work requires a lot of travel, I've aged prematurely. But let's not talk about age. I'm very grateful that you're letting me stay. I'll probably have to trouble you for a few days. Mr. Luong laughed heartily. It's no problem at all. Though our village is poor, everyone is hospitable. The only thing is, the house isn't very comfortable, I hope you don't mind. Mr. Long nodded, finishing his cup of tea, then said. You're truly kind-hearted, village chief. I know a little about feng shui and fortune-telling. To repay your kindness, I have some news for you. Mr. Luong replied. Please go ahead, Mr. Long. Mr. Long continued. It's been a long time since your village had such a heavy rain, hasn't it? Mr. Luong answered. Yes, it's been dry for a while, and the water in the canals is almost insufficient for irrigation. This rain is a blessing, it saved this year's crop. Mr. Long shook his head. Rain is good, but if it continues to pour like this for 4 to 5 days and the water doesn't drain in time, won't the crops be flooded? Mr. Luong looked at Mr. Long, smiling, and said. You must be joking. After a long drought, we've finally got some rain. A brief downpour isn't going to cause flooding. Mr. Long sighed. If you don't believe me, I don't know what else to say. But the rain earlier was just the beginning. In the next 5 days, it will rain heavily without stopping. If we don't take advantage of today to create drainage channels, open up the canals, and use tarps to protect the crops ready for harvest, I fear that when the heavy rain comes, it'll be too late to act. Just as Mr. Long finished speaking, the sky suddenly cleared, making the village chief even more skeptical of the grave digger's warning. In fact, at the village well, the omen of a catastrophic prolonged rain had already appeared in the water bucket. The water in the bucket was full to the brim, overflowing, a sign that the village deity had given to the villagers. The old man in white didn't appear randomly and didn't just show Mr. Long the way to the village chief's house for no reason. There was a purpose behind everything. However, when warned about the heavy rain, no one believed it to be true. That night, Mr. VNG was jolted awake by the sound of thunder shaking the entire house. Accompanying the thunder was a torrential downpour. Despite the heavy rain, there was no storm or strong wind, only the relentless rain. When Mr. VNG woke up, he saw Mr. LNG standing at the door, looking out towards the pond. Mr. VNG hurriedly asked, "Is the rain too heavy for you to sleep?" Mr. LNG turned around and replied, "Actually, I haven't slept yet. Look, village head." As he spoke, Mr. LNG pointed towards the pond in front of the yard. Lightning flashed repeatedly, and under its light, Mr. VNG had to rub his eyes twice to believe what he was seeing. The rain hadn't lasted long, but the water level in the pond had already risen, flooding the yard. Having lived here for decades since he was born, Mr. VNG had never seen the pond water rise so high that it flooded the yard. He looked at Mr. LNG, shivering and goosebumps rising, and took a step back in shock. "Flood, it's flooding. If it's flooding here, then out in the fields, the crops will be ruined. I should have listened to you." Mr. LNG sighed and shook his head, replying, "It's too late now. Even if we go and try to open a drainage path to the canal, it won't be quick enough. This is fate, it can't be changed." Turning back into the house, Mr. LNG started to calculate, but frowned as a loud clap of thunder echoed through the rainy night. He pondered. Why is the prediction not aligning? Could this downpour be just the beginning of a greater disaster? This village is about to face serious trouble. For days later, it was still drizzling. Though the rain wasn't as heavy as the previous days, after 2 days of torrential rain, the crops and fields were unprotected and completely flooded and ruined. With just over 2 months until the harvest season, seeing all their hard work submerged and withered, the villagers of Vien Tai, who relied solely on farming, felt their hearts break. By the afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the gloomy atmosphere of the earth and sky was not as bleak as the sight of the villagers despairing over their fields, hoping to salvage whatever they could. 5 days had passed, but Mr. LNG still couldn't derive any prediction about the events that had occurred in the village. In his career, this was the first time he faced such a situation. Unable to interpret the signs, despite his many suspicions, he couldn't explain or help the villagers. Natural disasters are acts of God, trying to intervene is impossible, such is fate. That evening, after dinner, Mr. LNG packed a few clothes into his bag. He also took some money and handed it to the village head, saying, "Thank you for letting me stay these past few days. This isn't much, but it's a token of my appreciation for the food and shelter. Please accept it. I'll be leaving early tomorrow morning." Mr. VNG firmly refused the money, saying, "Keep your money. The house is spacious and unused, and an extra bowl at mealtime doesn't cost much. Accepting this would imply that our hospitality can be measured by money. These past days, I haven't been able to sleep, constantly thinking about your words. If I had listened to you and informed the villagers, the damage wouldn't have been this severe. I feel so ashamed before the villagers, it's my fault." Mr. VNG, with tears welling up, continued speaking. Indeed, he hadn't slept in 3 nights, standing outside hoping for the rain to stop. In just a few days, his hair had visibly grayed from overthinking. Mr. LNG responded, "Natural disasters are determined by fate, sometimes knowing doesn't mean we can avoid them. Don't blame yourself. Compared to the vastness of the earth and sky, we are but specks of dust, powerless to alter fate. I deeply regret not being able to help the villagers." Mr. Luong, feeling melancholic, poured tea into the cup and responded, "Yes, we should follow the teachings. After drinking this fragrant tea, I'll retire early so I can leave tomorrow." Not long after brewing the tea, a woman rushed in through the gate into the courtyard. Spotting Mr. Vaughan seated, she rushed over so frantically that she tripped and fell on the veranda. Mr. Vaughan hurried to assist her as she cried out, "Mr. Vaughan, Mr. Vaughan! Disaster, our household! It's all gone! Mr. Vaughan!" While sobbing, she pulled at her hair. Mr. Vaughan asked, "What disaster? Why such intense grief?" She continued sobbing and said, "Our chickens. Our chickens. Someone poisoned them all, Mr. Vaughan. Oh, I'm done for. In just a moment, all the chickens, dozens of them, are dead. If even our chickens are wiped out like this, what hope is there left for us? Oh dear, oh dear." Mr. Vaughan frowned. In their village, everyone had always lived harmoniously and joyfully. In his 10+ years as village chief in Van Tai, never had there been thefts or poisoning of each other's belongings, let alone chickens. Mr. Vaughan said, "It's impossible. From ancient times until now, no one in our village would do such things." The woman struggled to stand, her hair disheveled, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Mr. Vaughan, if you don't believe me, please come to my house and see. I'm telling the truth. My chickens were all healthy this afternoon when I let them out, only to find them dead in the garden, legs stretched to the sky, when I went to put them back in their coop at dusk. If it wasn't poison, how else could all our chickens die like this?" Mr. Vaughan immediately fetched a flashlight and, passing by Mr. Long, said, "Sorry, I have urgent matters to attend to. Please rest at home." Mr. Long responded, "I've heard about it. Can I accompany the village chief?" Mr. Vaughan nodded. "That's fine. If you wish to come, then come with me." Mr. Long grabbed a flashlight and joined them. They followed the woman back to her house. Along the way, dogs barked incessantly. After a while, they arrived. Under the flashlight's beam, in the garden behind the house, the woman moaned, "Here, Mr. Vaughan. Look. They are all dead. Oh, they are all dead." In the light, over 20 chickens lay stiff, their necks twisted, bellies up, feet pointing towards the sky. Witnessing this firsthand, Mr. Vaughan finally believed it was true. He asked, "But why do you suspect someone poisoned them? This is your own grain, your own hands feed them." She cried and replied, "That's true, but after feeding them, I went out to the fields to gather some vegetables. When I returned home, they were all dead. Mr. Vaughan, think about it. If it wasn't poison, how could all our chickens die like this? They were perfectly healthy when I let them out of the coop." While Mr. Vaughan and the woman were discussing, Mr. Long quietly took out a long ivory-handled knife and a white glove from his pocket. He handed his flashlight to Mr. Vaughan and said, "If the village chief still doubts, look here. I will use this ivory-handled knife to prick the chicken's body." Mr. Vaughan and the woman watched nervously as Mr. Long pricked the chicken's body with the knife. He then held the tip of the knife under the flashlight's beam. Blood adhered to the blade about 2 centimeters from the tip, turning it black. "It's black blood," Mr. Long said softly. Mr. Vaughan was stunned, while the hostess covered her face and said, "I've already told you, Uncle, that someone in our household poisoned the chickens to death." She reached out to touch the spot where blood had stained the base of the elephant tusk spearhead to confirm once again whether it was really black blood or not, but Mr. Long stopped her. He said, "Don't touch it. We don't know where this poison came from or what type it is. If the village chief touches it, it could affect all of us. What needs to be done now is to dispose of all these dead chickens to prevent this poison from spreading outside." Upon hearing Mr. Long's words, the hostess slumped to the ground, sobbing. Oh heavens, disaster has struck. Even our chickens are all dead. Why didn't you just kill me too, so I wouldn't have to live like this anymore? Moved by her plight and the grief of her children, Mr. Vuong, despite being well off, was no stranger to hard work in farming and raising animals, which barely kept everyone fed. Seeing the dead chickens lying stiff in the garden, everyone felt heartbroken. Mr. Vuong said to her, "For now, let's follow Uncle Long's advice. Keep only one chicken. Tomorrow morning, I will go to the village hall to report this matter. If someone in our village is truly responsible for this, I will pursue this to the end. We cannot ignore this. Please don't be too sad. When I bring this up, I will also rally the villagers, everyone contributing what they can. It may not be much, but in times like these, a little food when hungry is worth more than a feast when full. Now, I will help you dig a pit and burn these chickens." Upon hearing Mr. Vuong's words, the hostess cried and thanked the village chief, suppressing her pain. Mr. Long also rolled up his sleeves to help dig the pit. After the dead chickens were treated with lime and burned, only one chicken was kept, and the next day Mr. Vuong called a village meeting at the village hall to present the matter. By the time they finished, it was already 9 p.m., and as they walked home along the deserted dirt road, Mr. Vuong said to Mr. Long, "Despite what Uncle said about the chickens dying from poison, I still can't believe someone in our village would do such a wicked thing." Mr. Long fell silent for a moment before replying softly, "Village chief, you've misunderstood me. I only said the chickens died from poisoning, but I didn't mention or confirm who did it." The village chief asked in surprise, "Then what? If it's poisoning, isn't it something done by humans?" Mr. Long sighed. "For now, let's go home. It's just that I fear if the chickens weren't poisoned by human hands, that would be the most terrifying thing. I say this hoping you won't be angry. Our village is about to face a great calamity." Back at the village chief's house, it was already well past midnight. The village of Van Tai felt completely transformed. After a prolonged rainstorm, a heavy, oppressive atmosphere enveloped the entire village. Just as spirits were beginning to recover from the devastation of the storm season, news spread that over 20 chickens belonging to one family had been poisoned, making Mr. Vuong, who had been contemplating deeply, even more thoughtful. As the night wore on, past midnight, Mr. Long jolted awake, having just heard the sound of a dog howling from somewhere in the village. The night was quiet, so the sound of a dog's howl echoed clearly. Immediately after the dog's howl, Vang, Mr. Vuong's dog, lying in the veranda under a pillar, suddenly leaped out into the middle of the tile courtyard, scraping with its front paws and growling. Woof! 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 It lowered its body, its front paws clenching as if about to pounce on something, even though it was well past midnight and there was no one outside. Woof! 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 Van continued to growl outside the courtyard, and Mr. Long had been awake for who knows how long, but he only stood inside the house, looking out through the wooden door crack. The night sky was quite bright tonight, and after the long rain, the moon and stars were clearly visible. In the eerie moonlight, Mr. Long saw Vang's fur bristling as it scratched up the entire tile courtyard, appearing fierce yet not moving. In humans and animals alike, there exists a survival instinct. When sensing danger, we prepare to retreat, and the weak look to the strong without hesitation to attack. On the first day arriving at the village chief's house, Yellow saw Mr. Long rushing out of the house in a panic. But tonight, he was all puffed up, his limbs in a defensive posture, not daring to bark but only growling softly. This was because something outside was causing him fear. Dogs, according to folk belief, can see things that humans cannot. In the middle of this night, humans weren't what scared the dog. There must be something else besides ghosts. The dog's howls echoed strangely tonight. Mr. Long noticed it wasn't normal. The dogs only howled at night when they saw spirits around them. Then their barks turned into distant, rhythmic howls. A moment later, Yellow returned to normal, but its steps on the veranda were hesitant, exhausted. As it approached the pillar, Yellow lay down motionless, as if it had just fought with something terrifying with all its might. Mr. Long also returned to bed but couldn't sleep anymore. Every passing day seemed to bring some strange changes here. The odd thing was that Mr. Vaughan was usually a sound sleeper, even a slight noise would wake him up, but since Yellow growled and scratched, he still knew nothing. The next morning when Mr. Vaughan woke up, he saw Mr. Long sitting outside petting Yellow. Mr. Vaughan said, "Oh, how come the dog is like this, sir?" Mr. Long smiled, "Oh, he's fine, probably just likes being petted so he's lying quietly. He'll be running around again soon." True to Mr. Long's words, when he let go, Yellow jumped up, wagging its tail and gently nudged Mr. Long's hand, licking it affectionately. Standing up, Mr. Long asked the village chief, "Do we also raise chickens here?" Mr. Vaughan nodded, "Yes, we have a few released in the garden. We raise a few so they can peck for worms in the soil, then return to the coop at night. If you want chicken meat, after the village meeting, I can prepare a chicken feast for you." Mr. Long chuckled and replied, "Thank you, but that's not what I meant. Chief, come with me to the garden for a bit. I want us to try something together." Although Mr. Vaughan didn't quite understand what Mr. Long wanted to do, he still went with him to the garden. Outside, the garden was lush. Under the trees were the chickens Mr. Vaughan raised, all healthy and chubby. Mr. Vaughan laughed, "Now that's the best fed chicken right there." While Mr. Vaughan was speaking, Mr. Long pulled out a wrapped paper from his pocket, unwrapped it to reveal a handful of rice inside. Mr. Long scattered it on the ground for the chickens to peck at, much to Mr. Vaughan's surprise. "Where did you get this rice?" Mr. Vaughan asked. Mr. Long replied, "It's the rice from Miss T's house. Last night, her entire flock of chickens died. While we were disposing of their bodies, I discreetly stole a handful of rice scattered for the chickens to eat." Mr. Vaughan was startled. "My goodness, why would you do that? If the chickens ate poisoned rice, what then?" Mr. Long calmly replied, "Chief, don't worry. If any of the chickens die from eating it, I'll compensate you 3 times the amount you could sell them for. Moreover, this is the most effective way to confirm if someone has poisoned their food or not, isn't it? Chief, please wait patiently and see." Listening to Mr. Long made sense. If Mr. Vaughan's chickens ate rice intended for Miss T's and then dropped dead, there must have been someone who poisoned them. But after an hour, none of the chickens died. All 3 were still healthy and normal. Mr. Vaughan asked, "So, what does this mean?" Mr. Long said, "The poison that killed Miss T's chickens didn't come from this rice. This matter is getting dangerous.